You're listening to Halfway There, episode number 177, Wyss and the Kindness of God. Hey friends, welcome to Halfway There. This is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. I'm your host, Eric Nevins. Thank you so much for being here. If it's your first time listening, I'm glad you're here. This is going to be a great conversation today to share with you. If you haven't already hopped onto our mailing list, just go to halfwaytherepodcast.com. Make sure you get notified every time we send out a new episode. Usually come out on Monday mornings if I've got my act together. So today I'm excited to have this conversation with a friend. He's the founder and executive director of Walls Down Ministry. He's Wyss. Welcome to Halfway There.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me.
I am glad to have you here. I've heard a little bit of your story because you've shared it. It's on YouTube, but I can't wait to share it here and to hear a little bit more of kind of God, how God has worked with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. We have just a small piece about the founder of Walls Down, but we'll go more into your story later.
Yeah, sure. So a little bit about me. I am married to a woman. I have two amazing boys, and they're 1 and 5. Their birthdays are coming up, and so I love being the father to boys. Change has changed my life. Been married for 11 years, live in Indianapolis, and I do counseling kind of on the side, and counseling at the intersection of faith and sexuality. So that's always interesting.
Yep.
And that's something I really enjoy doing. And then I also do trainings and speaking in groups for Walls Down. So.
Right. Okay, great. So I think we can go into your story because how you started Walls Down is really directly related to your story, right? So
yeah,
let's do
absolutely.
that. So you're in Indianapolis now. Did you grow up there?
No, I grew up in Ohio.
Okay.
I say the cornfields of Ohio.
Yeah.
Out in the middle of nowhere. So my families are farmers, and that's where I grew up.
I'm from Iowa, so I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back in the days of AOL Instant Messenger, my screen name was Trapped in Corn. So if that tells you a little bit how I felt about where I grew up. But it was a nice, peaceful place, but it was also a typical small town as well. So
right, which has some advantages and some disadvantages.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you what, though, one thing I think whenever we drive back to Iowa from Colorado in the summertime, particularly late in the summer, and the corn is high, like you're driving by all the cornfields, it's just good for my soul. There's something about that.
Yeah.
If I can get out in rural Iowa somewhere and just drive on the 2-lane roads through the cornfields, it really is peaceful. It really is beautiful.
I have learned to appreciate it more as I have gotten older and appreciated mindfulness, Christian meditation, things like that, which was not in my 20s. I didn't even have a grid for that. And during that time, I was like, get me out of here.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in these cornfields. But now I'm like, there's actually something really attractive and beautiful about it. Not that I want to live there.
Totally.
But there's it is nice to visit.
I like to eat it when I get the chance to. That's not bad. So
yeah.
Okay. So growing up in Ohio, small town Ohio, did you grow up in a Christian family, or what was it like there?
No. So we didn't grow up in a Christian family. I would say that we believed in Jesus. We believed in God. We're Midwesterners for crying out loud. So of course we're Christians. That's kind of a rule. And so kind of Christians by default. We had a Bible in our home. But we did not grow up going to church. I'd been to church with friends, but we're not. I wouldn't have considered us a Christian household by any stretch.
Okay, well that's interesting. So, but you did think that you were Christians,
for sure. What else would you be?
Right, that's true.
There was, you kind of default. We knew that the right thing was to go to church, so we weren't opposed to people going to church. And when friends of mine wanted me to come to church with them, my mom and dad were completely fine with that and would say that's great. And so we believe in Jesus too. So.
Gotcha.
So what more is there? So
not antagonistic, but
certainly not.
Maybe not on fire, we might say.
Yeah, we weren't living our lives for Jesus. We weren't allowing him to inform any part of our lives at all. And we were a typical Midwestern family. So we had pretty much whatever we needed. We were very comfortable. We weren't filthy rich, but we weren't dirt poor either. And so we were just like, what else did we need? And so there wasn't really a need to ask God about our lives.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that makes sense. So how did you find Jesus? Like, what was that? When was that later? Was that much later?
So my parents, there were times where I would answer altar calls when I would go to my friend's church, which was really interesting. So I feel like my heart was always responsive to the gospel. I would go down and be prayed for and ask Jesus into my heart. So,
that's really interesting.
Very genuinely. Yeah, very genuinely. But there wasn't really, I don't know that I knew what that really meant as far as going forward. And so, but I guess I would maybe back up. When I was 12, I realized that I was attracted to boys and I was not attracted to girls. And so kind of came to this place where I was like, oh, and then I heard the word gay. It was used in a lot of different contexts at that time.
Yep. Right.
And then
mostly negative.
Almost always.
We should point that out. Right.
Any positive. Yeah. No positive narratives.
And definitely sometimes, as a way to put somebody down.
Oh yeah. So gay was like a synonym for stupid or dumb,
right,
or, something like that. But then I realized that they were actually talking about people, and realized that, oh my gosh, I think I might be one of those people. And my instinct was to look up and say, God, if you're there. I don't know that I was thinking like God was mad at me. Wasn't thinking about him disapproving. I just knew that in a community sense, that was suicide. And so you could not exist as a gay person where I grew up, or in the Midwest. And so I was like, God, if you could take this away, that would be great. Because the growing up, what I heard about gay people was that they were disgusting and weird and strange, and only hearing about the caricatures, seeing caricatures of gay people on TV, and didn't want to be that. And people were always made fun of at best.
Right.
And so I didn't really have a good grip on what all that meant for me.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was interested in, because how, you just realize being a 12-year-old is hard anyway, right?
Yeah, puberty is awful.
It's just tough. But then discovering and feeling like you're same-sex attracted and feeling very out of place. What were the emotions that went along with that? I'm very interested that you reach out to God. You felt like God was there, but you weren't quite, but you kind of wanted him to take that away from you rather than embrace it.
Yeah. It was really kind of a strange thing to initially do. On my feelings, I was terrified. I was terrified that this was going to be the rest of my life. And what would that mean? And my automatic thought was, well, you'll have to leave. If they don't kick you out, you'll definitely have to leave. So you might as well just. So from the time that I was, even before puberty, really, I was realizing like I'm gonna have to leave. So you almost kind of start mentally, which is really sad. I mean, you start mentally preparing for leaving your family and having to create a life on your own, which is just strange that I was even there. But that's not atypical. It's really actually very common with gay people.
Wow.
So even if they grow up in super loving homes, there's this is always the deal breaker. This has to be the deal breaker. So you grow up with that mentality. So I was really fearful that my community would see me as dangerous and dirty and disgusting, because that's how they saw gay people for the most part. Not everyone, but most people.
Yeah. Can I just ask when this was? I'm guessing this was like 90s.
Yeah, I was born in 85. So
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been mid 90s.
Yeah.
Mid 90s when is kind of where I was. And, I had experienced about 5 or 6 years of sexual abuse from the time I was 9 to about 15. And so that contributed to a whole lot of confusion, because there was parts of it that I liked and parts of it that I didn't like. And then so to add attraction to boys on top of that felt like, oh, well, this is why that has happened. It's because you're gay, and that person knew it. That person knew you were gay. So I wasn't able to tease out the difference between abuse and then my orientation.
Yeah.
Not that those things are completely separate, but they are they're very distinct things. So.
Right. Yeah. So I was wondering that, like, how do you connect them at all, or do you feel like, because I've heard that you hear that sometimes.
Sure. Yeah.
And so one of my goals, if I hadn't said this yet, but one of my goals with this conversation is I want to hear from you, just your whole story, because I want those of us who are listening who maybe don't have a same-sex attracted friend, or have a very political view of it, to hear a real story. So take us into that. Like, what, that's one of the things that they say.
I appreciate that, because usually when I'm interviewed, whether it's on one side of the aisle or the other, people are wanting a certain answer.
Yeah.
They either want my orientation to be because of the abuse or not related at all. And to say that sexual abuse didn't affect my sexuality, well, of course it did. It wrecked my world. It wrecked my identity. Wrecked my sense of what it means to feel pleasure and call it good. And so all of that is absolutely linked. But to say that I'm attracted to men today, and that has been my consistent, persistent orientation since I was 12, because I was abused, I would say would be false. I don't think there's a recipe to make a gay person. I've met plenty of straight men that were abused by older boys or men, older men, that their sexuality is a wreck for sure, but they're very much attracted to women and not attracted to men at all. So I just don't, there's not a consistent recipe. And I know that in this world, we want things to be black and white, and I just haven't found that that's the case. So I just, I give it some weight, but I don't give it all the weight. And I have to be okay with really a lot of not knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is both an honest and realistic perspective. Yeah. Right. And I really appreciate that. The other thing that you said that really, caught me is, that messed up your view of what pleasure is, because there were some things you liked and some things you didn't in the middle of abuse.
Yeah.
And you never hear people talk about that.
Yeah.
But it's a thing, right?
It was the most powerful part of my healing, was being able to actually name the fact that there were parts of that did feel good, because my body was made for, but God made my body in a way to experience sexual pleasure. And whether that was done in a right way or a wrong way, it didn't matter. My body still felt pleasure. And so to be able to say, like, I felt pleasure, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But it was in the wrong context. It wasn't with the right person.
Right.
It wasn't at the right age. To be able to say those things was really freeing, because most victims of abuse will say, what is wrong with me that I liked, that there were parts of me that liked that?
Right.
That I didn't run screaming from the room.
Right.
So I must have chosen that. You know what I mean? And so the evil behind that thinking is so insidious and causes us to stay in shame. And
there's
it wasn't until years later that I was able to work through that.
Yeah, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt hanging around those experiences. Sure. And so I appreciate you saying that. That it really is I think it's, like you said, not an uncommon experience. So something that we definitely need to speak of. So where, in all of that part, your family wasn't really religious, but you seem to believe in the Lord in some way. Mm-hmm. When you're throughout that season of abuse, and where was God for you? Were you just?
I would not have said he's anywhere. I mean, he's up in the sky watching us, and is mostly mad. He's mostly mad at us. My understanding of the gospel was that we were so bad that God had to die. And so,
and that's so not really present.
Yeah, certainly not present. I mean, I had learned to think about, like, if you want to do, I was a very motivated human being to do, even at a young age, to get what I wanted. And so I never thought about God looking out for me, or, I think that's what abuse does. I mean, it kind of sets the stage for, well, no one maybe is looking out for me. And this world's pretty difficult, and I need to figure this out. And then you add orientation on top of that, or just confusing sexual experiences, and it's like, this has to all be dealt with internally on my own.
Right. Eventually, the abuse stops. What happens then, and then how do you go from there?
Yeah, well, the short version is kind of coming to terms with my sexuality and saying, oh my gosh, I know this is true of me. I'm I'm gay. I tried to date a couple girls in high school, and that was clearly not going to work.
Yeah.
So there was just nothing there for me. And so at 17, I came out to my friends and family, and that's when Jesus kind of came on the scene, at least in our human, like as if that's when we realized he came on the scene. I think he was always there, but
what does that mean? Tell me that story, because that's we got time.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Well, I tell people I came out on Thursday, and my parents went to church on Sunday, and they got saved. They got saved that day. And so, nothing makes you realize your need for Jesus and your lack of being able to control things, like having a gay son, apparently. And so, my parents became Christians when I came out, and I wasn't opposed to them becoming Christians. I thought everybody should be a Christian. But I wasn't. But it quickly turned to, we're Christians, and now you need to not be gay. And this is what our family's doing. And then it kind of came this thing over, like, if you want to be okay with God, now you can't be gay. And I was like, well, I've just spent the last 5 to 6 years trying to not be gay.
Yeah.
So like, there's nothing I can do about that. And so there's a lot of hopelessness and a lot of suicidality.
Can we talk about identity for a second?
Sure.
Because what does that do to your identity to spend so many years trying not to be something that you already know you are?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I heard somebody say one time that shame, oh gosh, how did they put it? The thing we've been shamed for the most often, I'm totally butchering this quote, we often take on the identity of the thing we've been shamed for the most. And so when I walk in the room, I mean, people would, in high school, every now and then, I mean, not continually, but would ask, like, hi, are you gay? Like, you seem kind of gay.
Oh, wow.
I very much met the stereotype for that. And I felt like that was always amplified in my mind. So to know that I was walking into a room and people would ask that, I'm like, man, there's something that I'm doing that people are seeing of me, that I'm just sitting down and eating my lunch at the lunch table, and people are saying, you seem gay. I'm like, man, what am I doing? So like, when people look at me, they see a gay person, and that absolutely transforms how you think about yourself, because you're in your mind's eye. How do you understand that people see you? Well, they understand me primarily as a gay person, because I'm not even doing anything, and they think I'm gay. So, and then I already had those feelings, and of course I was already wrestling with that. And so that became a primary identity in a way that I saw myself. All of my giftings and talents and abilities, all the things I was interested in that had nothing to do with sexuality, all became part of that because I fit the stereotype so well. So
what?
The fact that I didn't like football and I wasn't good at it, but I was good at tumbling and gymnastics. I was really excellent at that. That I wanted to play volleyball, that I liked cats and not dogs, that I liked this type of music, but I didn't like 80s power ballads.
Man, those are the best. Have you heard my theme music, man?
Yeah. So, I mean, all of those things that men stereotypically are, felt like I was not that.
Yeah.
I didn't have another grid for that. And so everything in my mind, in my teenage mind, became about, oh, it's because you're gay. Yeah. Oh, this is what makes you different, because, so everything kind of fell under this big banner of a gay person, gay man.
Okay. Yeah. So your identity just gets really wrapped up in that. But then
for me it did.
Yeah.
For me it did.
Well, I think for anybody it would, right? Like, just if that's what you're hearing, that's what you're thinking about, that's where you are. And then at the same time, trying not to be, I think that's got to be a little bit soul splitting is the way I want to, right? Like, just this whole kind of feeling of no.
Well, sexuality and the things the longings and passions that we experience, which just as human beings, they're so intrinsically part of who we are. And not that we need to take on the identity of our emotions or just what we feel by any stretch, but when you feel something that deeply and it feels like it's something so hardwired and that you could fight it tooth and toenail and try to get rid of it, and it only seems to amplify. Splitting off a piece of who you are is sometimes the only option to make it, to survive emotionally. So,
right. So I wanted to talk about that because I think it's relevant to us, even, yeah, certainly in the sexuality conversation, but even there are a lot of people, I think we've been told as Christians, as evangelicals, that you have to be something you're not, regardless of whether it's gifting, whether it's gender. A lot of times, you know, some places don't want you to be a woman, right? Because, or whatever, you have to be these roles. And I'm wrestling with that in various ways in my life. And I think there's a message there about how painful and hurtful that is for people, whatever the issue is, right? Whatever the thing that you're wrestling with, it's important to actually be honest about who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so much of that was because everything was tied to being gay, and apparently being gay was the worst thing that you could be as a Midwestern male. It was like, man, it's not just my sexuality or my attractions. All of me is wrong.
Yeah.
Which I just think is such a, like, what a powerful lie that is that everything that makes me come alive inside, my giftings and talents and abilities, the things that God has put in me, to say, this is how you image me well, is tied under gay, and gay is awful. Not just not acceptable, horrifically awful.
Right.
So then it's like everything in me needs to change, or it's not acceptable unless I embrace my orientation, unless I embrace my sexuality, unless I embrace these things, and I could never be truly inwardly free.
Yeah. So you finally decide, okay, I'm coming out, I'm gonna do this, and then you embrace a lifestyle, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, gay people lived in cities. They didn't exist anywhere else. They certainly didn't exist in cornfields. So
there are no gay people in cornfields.
There are no. Yeah,
that's funny.
I was me and one other person who was a lesbian in our high school. We were the gay community, and our plans were to escape to Columbus, Ohio, to the city. So, to me, I needed to get to the city and live out what that meant. I knew that. I'd been on, in gay chat rooms growing up. That's kind of when the internet kind of boomed, a lot more personal computers and things like that. So there was no filters, no internet oversight or anything like that. So I knew that gay people lived in cities, and they go to clubs and bars and parties, and this is where the gay people live. And I was like, if I could just get there, then I could be free. And I know that's not the life that every gay person lives, but it in my mind, and that's the life that I gravitated to and felt comfortable in. So.
And you just got out of high school. So what did you know?
Right. Yeah. The world's still very small.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you go to Columbus? Is that where you went?
Yeah. I found a friend group in Columbus, and then started dating men there in Columbus, Ohio. And they kind of took me under their wing and showed me where people like us went. To the bars and restaurants and clubs that were acceptable for us and where we could be safe. So kind of got baptized in the gay community in that way.
Yeah, it sounds like you found a community. So like a group of people who accepted you, which that must have felt like 100% different.
Oh, it was huge. I mean, to always feel like I had some type of social handicap lurking within inside me, and then to come out and realize that social handicap was true. To be rejected by most people when I came out, and then to walk into a room full of men who are like me, my handicap went away, the shame went away, and I actually felt like, wow, I actually don't hate being male. I actually enjoy being male.
Yeah,
here, that was a powerful shift. I mean, I was able to live one life rather than two, and so to me, coming out was a very freeing experience. It wasn't this. People always talk, in Christian circles, people talk about coming out as if it's this dark thing, led by Satan himself,
Right.
And for me, I was like, wow, if this is Satan, this really seems to be setting my heart free.
Wow.
And I don't think that, but.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I find it strange that honesty is something that evangelicals tend not to appreciate. Like, right. You see this, I think, also with the recent people. I'm thinking of Joshua Harris and the guy from Hillsong who come out and say, "Hey, I'm not even sure I believe anymore." I'd rather you be honest about that than you not be honest about that.
Right.
I'd rather know.
A faith crisis. Yeah, a faith crisis is common.
Right. It is.
So like walking. And maybe people have a lot of ideas about all that, but to say like I'm doubting whether this is actually true, like who doesn't? Who isn't there?
Right.
Or it hasn't been there at some point.
Right. So it's freeing, but it's just
Yeah.
interesting to me that sometimes we don't. So it doesn't surprise me that that was your experience. Oh, I'm not having to be burdened and restricted anymore, and it's a
Yeah.
good thing. What was that? Tell us about that. What would somebody? So you went for like the party kind of life because that's what you thought it was about. But
Yeah.
what would somebody maybe who doesn't have those kinds of experience not know that might be not interesting, but just valuable for us to know about your lifestyle then?
You mean about specifically walking into like mainstream gay community?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my experience, and this probably won't be very popular, but I feel like this was true. I mean, so the men that I was around, and it was mainly men. So like LGBT community was not like we hung out with trans people. We didn't hang out with lesbian people. I was like gay. I was mainly hanging out with gay men. And so walking into that community, there was two feelings. One, wow, there are people like me that exist. And these people give me permission to be me. Super powerful. Loved it. Friends were awesome. Boyfriend was awesome. And at the same time, also felt like the same things that were plaguing me were also plaguing them. And so in some ways, I won't say that it seemed like an unhealthy community. It just seemed like a lot of hurting people. And so, yeah, it just seemed like a very much a hurting. There was a lot of men who had very much been hurt growing up and were filling those wounds with one another. Now that's not every gay person, so I'm not making these large brushstrokes, but there was this sense of like, man, the same brokenness that drives me to want to be with a man seems to be driving many of my friends as well.
Well, right. So what I'm hearing in that is oftentimes shared experiences bring us together, right? And so,
without question.
Yeah. And so having
shared trauma, shared rejection. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So that totally makes sense. That's not surprising. That's very human.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, so there is very much a healing element of the gay community because community heals people.
Yeah.
Doctrine doesn't heal people. Community heals people. And whether that is a doctrine based on Christ or a doctrine based on cultural norms, community is something that's much more intrinsic than doctrine. And so I think that's a lesson that the church can learn really, is that you giving me verses doesn't heal my soul. You wrapping your arms around me and loving me, that'll heal my soul.
Yeah, absolutely.
Much quicker, right?
Absolutely. So. Okay. So take us into that because I'm not exactly sure what the timeline looks like for you, but I know eventually you find Christ through that. So catch us up and tell us that story.
Yeah. So I mean, being involved in the gay community was very freeing. I went to pride parades and gay rallies, and just started dating my boyfriend, and really felt like, man, this is what I was wanting. And then at the end of the day, I would say that my heart was also really empty. And it's not that I was a super self-aware 19-year-old, but I was aware enough to know that my boyfriend for a human, seems to be perfect for me. My friends are amazing, and I enjoy them so much. And yet there is something going on in my soul that seems it seems empty, and I can't. And this obviously it's not the people in my life. It's not their fault. And so I began to feel this aching sense of just emptiness that I think is very human.
Yeah.
When we don't have Jesus. And so, I went to college during my freshman year at Ohio University, and I was interested in Jesus, but the worlds of LGBTQ and the world of Christianity were polar opposites, and you could not combine the two. And I didn't know how to get rid of my interest in Jesus, and I didn't know how to get rid of my orientation. And so, what I tell people is I was an openly gay man and a closeted Christian, or an interested seeker. And so I would tuck my Bible underneath my arm Tuesday nights for Bible study, and I would go to group Bible study without any of my friends knowing, because I was like, I'm interested in Jesus, and I have a right to get to know him. There was just something about it that I was like, I'm going to get to know him. And so I didn't tell any of the people in my Bible study about it, but there was a period of seeking there. And then long story short is that I ended up breaking up with my boyfriend because he was not, he couldn't be my everything. and I was aware of it. So in my mind, I needed to move on to the next person. If you're not meeting my needs, then I need to move on to the next person. And so I did. After getting out of that relationship, I think in my heart, I felt frantic. Like I needed to keep finding another person. And so sexual abuse had really set me up to only know how to connect with men sexually. I don't think that causes me to be gay, but I think it certainly affected. And that's where I would think those things kind of overlap. Sexual abuse and orientation.
Yeah.
Is that sexual abuse really, set me up to only know how to connect with men through sex. And that was happening more and more often with less commitment. And I didn't like that piece of me. I didn't mind being gay, but I didn't like that I treated myself so cheap. And that really led me to a place where I was like, I was ready to surrender some things, but I had an experience with God. I woke up next to a man, one morning. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go to church. So I drove an hour to my parents' church, which was interesting. I mean, like, why would I go to this church?
Yeah.
Why would I drive an hour? And after clubbing all night, and after wearing my clothes that were too tight, they were great for club clothes. They were not appropriate for church. And so why I thought I should drive an hour to a small town church is beyond me. But I went there, felt welcomed enough to stay, and the Holy Spirit was all over my heart that morning in a way that I had never experienced, was not expecting to experience, and didn't have a grid for, knowing that he was the creator of the universe and I was having really random sex. I did not feel like a prime candidate for the love of God that morning. And yet Jesus made it a point to overwhelm my soul with goodness and kindness. And that changed me forever.
Wow. I did not feel like a prime candidate for the love of God that morning. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, so there was like this, I was told that God sends gay people to hell. So in my mind, like, God was against people. God's against people like me from the start. Like, before you get to run your race, you're disqualified. Somebody has thrown the flag and you're disqualified. And so it's almost kind of like, so I had a beef with God, and yet I was drawn to him. And so I'm fighting the love of God that morning because I feel like he's wanting to wrestle me into submission. And yet all I keep feeling is this wooing, a gentle hurricane, maybe.
Yeah. Well, take us into it. Like, what was the actual experience like? Describe it all for us.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if people have had, I think people experience God in different ways, but
sure.
The only way that I know how to experience, or to put words to what I experienced, is I just felt like my soul, my heart, my inner world was being drawn up to where I was just like, man, I feel like this is a place where I'm being drawn into, and this feels good and right. And I don't know what to do with it. God, you seem too kind. Is this a setup? Are you setting me up to, but I couldn't help. It was just something in me that wanted to lift my hands and just say, okay, you can have it all. And I feel like that's the human experience of God coming into a soul, that we want to surrender to him because we want to surrender to goodness and give our lives over to something good and pure. And God kind of took me on that roller coaster that morning, and I left not saying, oh, I'm definitely a Christian, or I didn't leave saying, oh, I'm giving up my sexuality, or I'm surrendering that piece of my life to him. I left saying, you are way better than I thought you were. Crap, what do I do with that?
Wow.
So and it just shook my whole, I didn't have a container for that type of a God. And so that really broke down all of my walls, so that when I woke up the next man that I woke up to, that was completely random, that I believe had drugged me the night before. And
oh man,
really, I mean, that's where my life was at that point. Outside of the relationship with my boyfriend, when that ended, my inner world was frantic enough to, and I didn't know how to recognize danger. Abuse taught me that, like, that's not dangerous, that's normal. And so to find myself being drugged and then taken advantage of, waking up next to someone that I had no idea who they were, I was like, my instinct was, God is really good. And if he liked me that morning, he's going to like me this morning.
Wow.
And so I want to know that. I've got to have that peace that I felt on that Sunday morning, because obviously my inner world is a complete wreck. And that allowed me to say, okay, if you want a train wreck of a sexuality for me, you can have that. It's eating my lunch every day.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't declaring I was straight. I wasn't declaring anything. I was just saying, I want to follow Jesus. And I believe that you're good. And I believe that you're worthy of my surrender.
Yeah. Which is awesome. I love that the Lord did that with you, that he was so kind to just show you, hey,
Yeah.
I love you. It's not about that stuff. It's about you.
What's interesting is there were no threats of hell. Do this or I'm sending you away forever. There was literally like God never hung over my head eternal punishment or eternity with him, as if that was supposed to be the primary reward or punishment.
Right.
It was like, my life with me is good, and I'll be kind. I'll be relentlessly kind to you. And let me prove that to you today. Like it was just, so, I mean, we're often trying to scare people, especially LGBT people, and scaring them into the church or into surrender. And I'm like, God never did that with me.
Well, we're trying to scare them into a behavior change.
Mm-hmm.
I often say you can't preach the gospel of no condemnation with condemnation. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I love that.
If that's what we believe, then that's how it is. And so we have to embrace that. And be okay with it.
For sure. Yeah. And we have to trust that God will do that in his timing, and that kindness actually works, but we don't really believe it. Shame works much faster. Than kindness.
Yeah. It'll bring you down front to make the preacher look good. Right. So
for sure.
That's, that sometimes I think is what we're after, instead of real, true, deep and meaningful change, which God does, which I think is really evident in your story. God was after you clearly from the time you were a child, right? He wanted to know you, and you were curious about him. And, but it takes, sometimes that moment for him to come with his kindness to really do that. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes we have to run a little bit and see, right? Until we run right into him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's what I felt like happened. I mean, I felt like he was very consistently present with me. Looking back, I know he was very consistently present with me in the gay bars and the gay restaurants with my friends. And I'm just like, man, Jesus. I mean, then I started to read the Gospels, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's actually pretty typical of you to be in places like that.
Those are the people he hung out with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the ones he had kind words for, which is always beautiful. If you do a little imaginative prayer, friends, I mean, you could do John 8. You can do even John 4, the woman at the well. Do an imaginative prayer with that. Yeah. Oh my gosh, Jesus is just so kind with her. You have to listen to him. Listen for the kindness. Don't listen for the critique. But okay, so you find Jesus, and you find yourself going, oh, okay. What happens? Like where do you go from there?
Yeah, well, I mean, after I Googled how to not be gay, because Google had just come out, and there wasn't really anything that was helpful. I was just like, well, I guess I'm just going to have to follow you, and I guess you'll lead me where you want me to be. And I never felt like he was asking me to be straight. So
yeah. So your assumption was, if I'm going to follow Jesus, I have to not be gay.
Yeah, I mean, that was really kind of I knew that my sexuality, I knew having random sex was not, or giving myself away easily. I would say that was maybe more of the hallmark of my life, was that it would not take very much coaxing for me to be with someone. And so I knew that wasn't going to be good. And I knew so whether God didn't want me to be gay, I just wasn't sure how that would work, but I felt like surrendering sexuality and not dating men or women was kind of a safe bet. And at least saying, like, you know what, you'll get to speak to me here. And I felt like he did. I felt like he kind of showed, and I felt like I could, for the first time, hear that the traditional sexual ethic of one man and one woman for one lifetime was not offensive. It wasn't aimed at me like a weapon. It was actually, I felt like I was saying, this is how I set it up for your good.
Yeah.
Like, you're not just the unlucky recipient of my sexual ethic. This is for your good and to bless your soul and for your heart to thrive. And I believe that because I knew my heart wasn't thriving when I did what I wanted to do, which is really, I mean, that's the gospel.
Yeah,
for every human.
absolutely. So that's interesting. So it was based on your experience. You're like, I was living this life and I wasn't okay,
Yeah.
emotionally. And so God's inviting you into something new and you were open to it because you had had the other experience.
Yeah. And so I would say like none of the scriptures on homosexuality or same-sex sex were ever really spoke to me. That really wasn't even in my, what was helping me make that decision. I just never, like, none of those verses really ever helped me to navigate that. I felt like there was an inward conviction to say, this isn't what I have for you.
Yeah.
Please trust me with that. And I was like, okay, and I felt like that's reasonable. You're good to me. And I don't understand all that, but okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to talk about that because I think that's just so beautiful. I guess maybe we have in your story already, but the whole idea of, God being good, the kindness of God and how that causes repentance. That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was really just kind of going based on the fact that God is very ridiculously, overwhelmingly kind, and that I don't have to have all this figured out. And now I could just hear things differently. I could read scripture differently, in a way that I felt like God was on my side rather than trying to twist my arm into getting me to obey. And so that really freed me up to just walk with him without pressure. I never felt like he was asking me to try to be straight, because I was very adamantly opposed to being straight, because that felt like, it felt like he would have been asking me to get rid of all my gifts and all the things that I really enjoy, because everything was under that label. And so, but I felt like he was just saying, just walk with me. Whether you use that label or not use that label, whether you, wherever you're at, like, I want you to walk with me. And so that was freeing. And I actually got into it was called a discipleship school. But basically we traveled and did ministry together. It's for just young 20 somethings. And, it was a group of people who were very passionate about experiencing intimacy with God. And so I really missed a lot of the Sunday morning church mess, that goes on in most churches. I felt like I was just kind of thrown into being intensely discipled by people who knew what it meant to yield their heart to God and experience fulfillment there. And while God was not on tap and on demand presence, or at least felt presence, I did feel the infilling of his spirit more in a way that satisfied my soul, in a way that sex with a man or relationship or romance with a man could not. And I felt like that was being juxtaposed continually. It was just like, hey, I get it. I felt like God was saying, I get it. You have had many lovers, and the way that you have known to get your soul needs met was through a man, and your boyfriend gave you peace temporarily, and he gave you joy temporarily, and he made you feel good about you temporarily. And I just felt like God was saying, I want to do all those things for you. I don't want you to crucify those things. I want to meet those things for you.
Yeah. Wow.
And that was powerful. Like, it wasn't white knuckling things. It was actually yielding to something bigger and better.
I love that. Okay. So you're in this discipleship group and you're growing. And eventually, because you started off and you told us that you're married to a woman. So tell us, like, that seems like I'm sure that was a journey.
Yeah, it was kind of a curveball.
That you weren't expecting.
I mean, if it sounds like a curveball just listening to the podcast, imagine what it was like to live that.
Yeah.
So it was actually during this discipleship program after the first year. A part of our training for this discipleship program was to go to a youth camp. And the woman that I met there, she was also a counselor at a youth camp, and we were just kind of youth camp leaders and whatnot. And she made it a point to come up to me and want to hear my story. Somebody had told her, like, hey, he has a really amazing story. And I think they'd probably given her context for what it was about, so I don't think she was completely surprised. But she was very interested. She was kind of giving me that look like, I'm interested in you. And I was like, oh, Lord, this girl's barking up the wrong tree. She has no idea what's about to come out of my mouth. And so I told her my testimony. I told her my story. And I just said, I'm attracted to men. I'm not attracted to women. And that was apparently, strangely, not enough to derail my wife's pursuit. I don't know if she just saw that as a challenge or what, but she was like, that's, wow, that's amazing. I see that you love Jesus. Can I have your number? And so I was like, oh gosh, that was not how I expected this to go. But when I prayed, about it. Cause I mean, I wasn't close to the idea of getting married, which was strange. I don't know why I felt like that was an option, because I was not attracted to women. I had never met a woman that I was attracted to, romantically and sexually, continually. Yeah. And so, I kind of went into the prayer closet, as I had learned to do. And I was just like, God, if this is something you have for me, I know it's going to be good because it's coming from you, because you're a good dad. But please don't let me ruin my life. Please don't let me ruin hers. I'm just trying to get it back on track with you. And I felt like he was giving me the green light to say, this is what I have for you. Will you trust me? And she was aware of that. So she was aware of that from day one. And I said I could not promise anything. I couldn't promise attraction to her, which is basically what you want your future husband to say.
Right.
I don't know if I'll ever be attracted to you. So you're wonderful and beautiful, and you love Jesus, and I'm sure you're quite a catch. But this man doesn't know if he'll ever be attracted to you and love you like that.
Well, you were honest with her. I mean, that's like, what else can you ask
I learned
for?
that honesty is best. Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. So I was never going to go back in the closet. I told myself, and I told Jesus, that's hell for me. And so we just learned we just started this relationship, and got to know one another. And I often say, it's amazing how much you get to know someone when you're not having sex with them. When you actually have to get to know them and look into their eyes and ask them questions about what their heart's like and what their heart's about. And you can't just cover over things with sex. You can't hotwire intimacy with sex. And I got to know her, and there was something about her that I felt like my heart started to open up, and I felt like, man, I really would love to be her husband. There's something about her that I want to give. I want to give my heart to her, and I want to give my body to her, not for my sake, but as a gift to her. And I never thought about my body that way. I'd never thought about sex that way. It felt like I really want her to know me. I want to share this with her in a way that I've never shared it with anyone else. And that seemed strangely biblical, but not typical in our culture. So we got to know one another. My heart opened up to be attracted to her. After more than a year, I would say it was more than a year of us pretty consistently dating. And I was just kind of along for the ride. She was along for the ride, and we were trusting that God would do what he wanted to do if this is who he had for us. And we were both convinced of that. So 2 years later, we got married. 2 years later, we got married, and by that time I was attracted to her. So, and I felt like, our relationship it's the same and different as many relationships. There's an intimacy that our marriage has that I feel like a lot of straight people don't get to experience, because it's easier to cover over things with sex, and that doesn't work for us. That doesn't work with me. I actually have to know someone and care about them.
Yeah.
With my wife, for sex to work and for it to be good and to be intimate. And it's an inconvenient grace and gift.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
So,
okay.
So sorry if that's too raw.
No, it's not too raw. No. Hey dude, that's what we're here to do, man. Okay. Like I'm so thrilled to just that you're sharing your story. So, our tagline is honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. And I am, I'm pleased to just share your story, that you're sharing your story, because it's not maybe it's not typical, but I bet it's not as rare as we'd like to believe. Right. So,
right. Yeah.
So that's what I enjoy. Okay. So I didn't ask you, often I'll ask about a dark night of the soul, because we mentioned that a little bit. You kind of wrestled a lot in the beginning. I don't know if since you've been a believer, if you've had some seasons like that or not.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So when I became a Christian, man, things were on the up and up. It wasn't that things were hard. I think I'd gotten used to life being emotionally difficult, because since I was 12, life was emotionally difficult. 9, so I had become aware of that or used to that. But life was really good in marriage, in career. Everything was just kind of falling into place. I really didn't have to try too hard. Marriage seemed actually easy, surprisingly easy. And then my wife and I said we were ready to start a family. And I was dreamed of being a dad and couldn't wait. And it took us a while to get pregnant, which was, not uncommon. It's fine. And then she miscarried. And then we tried for a lot longer. And then we had our first, which was great. But adding a kid into the mix is hard. And then she miscarried again after we had our first. And then we had a diagnosis of our second born son, Ezra, and he had a terminal diagnosis at the 18-week appointment. And we were offered the option to terminate. And we really, we really believe in life, and we really believe in giving a miracle working God. And so we were like, we're going to walk this out. And my wife carried full term. And he, and I was believing for a miracle the entire time. We were, we had a whole community of people. And so the long story short is he passed away as he was being delivered. He had his diagnosis was anencephaly, which doesn't cause the back half of his head to develop. And so he was completely safe in his mother's womb, but to survive outside of the womb was impossible unless God did a creative miracle where his head formed. And so, which I knew the possibility was slim, but I mean, it's God,
Yeah.
And God does miracles. I mean, he allowed a gay man to be attracted to a woman. So like, come on, like that's not hard. So it's not hard for you to form. You're knitting people together in his mother's womb. Keep knitting.
You hear stories like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm like, man, I'm a man of faith. I'm a man of God. Like let's do this. So believing very intensely in my and then my paradigm for God got shattered. My paradigm for suffering shattered because I knew how to suffer. I didn't know how to suffer that much. And I couldn't understand how God could allow when it would be so easy for him to fix this, why he wouldn't fix it.
Yeah.
And our hearts got baptized with suffering to where we just did not know we didn't know how to function. And we functioned well together. But to say that we trusted God, oh my gosh, how could I ever trust you again? And so for me, that has been, and that was just 2 years. So we're coming up on 2 years of his death, his birth and death, October 19th. And, and so that it's not that long ago. So the dark night of the soul was not that long ago. And I had just told friends just a couple of weeks ago, man, I feel like my heart's finally waking up, and so to say that, the Christian life, it shattered my idea that the Christian life is from glory to glory and on the up and up. And you just move from one staircase up. You just keep moving up the rungs to greater levels of connection with God. Was not anticipating the death of a child and grief that I couldn't contain.
Yeah. I'm sorry you had to go through that. That's one of the hardest things possible.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah. I think you're right though. John of the Cross tells us that it's probably more like valley to valley, right? It's more like we're moving through things that God is using to take things out of us. Very interesting. So that's a different way of experiencing God. How have you interacted with God through this period then?
Much more honestly. And I felt like I was already operating with honesty before.
Yeah.
And I was, but there's always more room for
there's
more
new layers, huh?
Very much so. And I would say the biggest thing that I kept from God. So I could invite God into my sexuality, into my sexual struggle, into my sexual fantasy without blinking an eye because he had proven himself to be safe there. But with anger, I did not have a grid for allowing God to be present in anger.
Wow.
So lust was fine, but anger was not.
Yeah.
And so I did. You could tell me that, oh, God's big enough to handle your anger, and I would have believed you. But to know that He wants my anger in a way that, because I always felt like me being angry with God was disrespectful of all of the things that
Yeah.
He had given me thus far. And and God had been really good to me up until that point. And now I had a reason to be angry. And mainly it wasn't that I was angry at God, but I was really more angry at feeling powerless in a world that was full of surprises and I couldn't control them. And so the picture of God giving me the ability to be angry looks like a son on his dad's lap, beating his dad's chest.
Yeah.
Saying, I'm so angry. And that is a safe place. That is and so God giving me the ability to, and the space to say, I want that anger from you. I want to receive that anger from you. That's not disrespectful. That's connection. That's that you trust this relationship enough to be angry and for us to have conflict and for us to work through that and for me to be there with you in grief.
Wow.
So that has taken my ability to trust God to a whole new level because I had to, or my faith wasn't going to survive, and it almost didn't.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fair. I think that's part of that's part of experiencing him and going through it. I wrote a little ebook called "What to Do When You're Mad at God," because
I'll have to read it.
Based on
working through it.
based on Habakkuk. You know what? It's really it's only 6 pages, so it's not the definitive volume. But I love the way Habakkuk just goes back and forth with God, and he says, "Look, I'm going to sit here and listen until I hear from you." And that's where we get the righteous will live by faith. Because that's what I think what it means to live by faith. So anyway, that's a really
I like that.
Yeah, that's dude. I'm just astounded by the ways that you have been intimate with God and through all kinds of things. That's I'm going to think about this for a long time. Inviting God into anger. That's wow. That's just.
That's a lot of what I do in counseling is helping people in their straight and gay people in their sexual struggles is what does it look like for God to be present with you? I'm like, and they're usually looking at me like, I don't think he wants to be.
Right.
I don't really want to be, but I have to be because I'm me,
Right.
And so just to even offer the opportunity for God to be present with you in sexual struggle. For me, that was a gift that I didn't really doubt much. It was a kind of a gift that God had given me was to trust him with my sexual struggle. But I find that that's not the case in a church hardly ever. It's a rare person that can invite God into that.
Yeah. That's one of my things that just, man, I'd love to change it. That so often we know how to be upset about sexual struggle, right? We don't necessarily know how to invite God into it, which really should be the case. I have a friend, and if you don't know her, I should introduce you to her. But her name is Mary DeMuth, who we just did an episode about sexual abuse in the church, and she says, "Hey, the church should be the safest place."
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true on a variety of fronts. So, okay. Sure. Ty, I think we could talk for a long time. I love this topic. There's a lot more we could do, but I want you to tell us about Walls Down. Cause tell us about this ministry. Maybe a little bit about how you started it and then what you guys do.
Yeah. So, I was in prayer in 2012 and I felt like God, showed me, or just kind of opened my eyes. I'll say he just opened my eyes to see the cultural war and battle that had been going on. And I was working in the church at the time, really not as concerned about the LGBT community as I am now, not involved as I am now. And I felt like it was during the whole Chick-fil-A debacle that went on several years, many years ago. And for me, that was the first time in culture that I saw what Christians are engaging LGBT people as if they're enemies, and they draw swords, and which causes LGBT people to draw them in kind. And we end up just running each other through, thinking that we're for just cause. And, and I can't speak for the LGBT community, but I can speak for Christians and saying, the one that we follow told his disciple to put the sword away. And so I would say that I started Walls Down to help Christians put their sword away and start with kindness. And if you use any weapon, it has to be kindness, because that's what God does with everyone. but specifically with LGBT people. And so Walls Down really kind of exists to help the theologically conservative church to love LGBT people generously. So those that would believe marriage is between one woman and one man for one lifetime, that God created two genders, male and female, and that's his good blessing for people. How with those beliefs do we love LGBT people, build trust with them, honor them in ways that mirror God, the way that God honors people, and respects them as well. And so Walls Down, we do a lot of different things in this ministry. We don't just tell our stories. We do trainings for churches from 1 hour to 8 hours. We have trainings for youth leaders and and senior level leaders in congregations. We have support groups for parents who have their kids have just come out, Christian parents, and are wanting to reconnect with them or build connection with them. And then for gay, non-straight people who are interested in Jesus or are Christians who have grown up in the church, we have groups for them as well. And so really we have just tried to where the church has not entered into the conversation, we have tried to build a bridge to it and equip Christian people to do really what many Christian people already wanting to do, is to love their gay neighbor well.
Right.
So.
Yeah, one of the reasons I want to talk to you is because you're not trying to change people; you're trying to love people.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because in counseling, I mean, when people hear that I'm a counselor in the area of LGBTQ issues, sexuality and faith, they think, "Oh, do you try to change people?" And that is the opposite of what I do. I create a space for people to sort through their values that they have, give opportunity for the Holy Spirit to do what He wants to do in the heart of the person sitting across from me. And I've had people leave affirming. I've had people leave non-affirming. I've had people say, "You know what? I don't even think being gay is my issue. I think it's this."
Yeah.
And I really just I want to respect and honor where God has that person, and that can't happen if I have an agenda to change someone's sexuality or gender identity. And that doesn't mean that I check my beliefs at the door. It just means that I don't force my beliefs on someone. And so I try to give people space to do that without a culture war.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you let the Lord do the convicting, and you do the caring, and that's, I think, our calling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, God's big enough to do His job
right.
as when and how He needs to. So.
Right. Yeah, that's what I really wanted to talk to you about, because I think I would love to see that be more the case. So this is a movement. One of the greatest gifts, we're not going to talk about politics. I think one of the greatest gifts that has happened to the church is the Supreme Court decision to kind of stop the whole gay marriage debate.
Sure. Yeah.
Because as politically devastating as that was, it takes all that off the table. And so now we have to have a different kind of approach.
Yeah, no, I know there's a lot of conservative people, a lot of conservative Christian people that would hate me even agreeing with that. But in this ministry with LGBT people, the thing that gets in the way the most is whether you were for or against gay marriage. Yeah. And it relationally sabotaged every time that we tried to connect and build trust with people, because it put people on one side of the aisle or the other, and no one felt loved by me affirming or not affirming, being affirming or not affirming. And so, me and my team, we're just glad that that's off the table, and now we can actually get to the business of loving people, regardless of where politics are. So no, I would absolutely echo that. I'm glad that it's kind of out of the way. Yeah.
I'm convinced that that's the mission of the kingdom of God. That's our job. And so let the politicians do their thing. We just have to love others. So Ty, thank you so much for sharing your story. I am just deeply moved by it. We'll be pondering it for a long time. Is there anything you want to leave us with?
If you want to know more about Walls Down, you can visit wallsdown.org is our website. And if I could leave everyone listening with one thing, it is that God is way more kind than you ever expected Him to be. There's no way that you're imagining God is more kind than He actually is, or more gracious than He actually is. He should be surprising you with grace and kindness. If He's not, lean in and let him speak to your heart, because I know that He has kind things to say.
Amen. That's perfectly stated. Wallsdown.org, guys, definitely check that out. I have links to Ty's website. I have anything that we talked about is all there at the show notes page at halfwaytherepodcast.com. So thanks a lot, Ty. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.